Kia ora, I'm Ian Harvey, founder of Collective Intelligence, and this is Stuff That Matters Now. Now my hoki mai. Today I get a chance to interview a young fella from Marlborough. He's done a lot in a very, very short time. From sort of budding mechanic, law student, professor of law, PhD, poet, philosopher, whole range of stuff. Today I get to interview Chris Gallavin, one of the more interesting fellows I've met for a wee while, and really looking forward to digging into his life journey and, I don't know, just the way this guy ticks. So I don't know Chris well, and I'm hoping to know him a little more by the end of it. So enjoy, people, and sit back and let's see how this goes. Welcome back, everybody. I'm sitting in downtown Fielding, it's got a good sound to it, on a very wet Saturday afternoon, and I am with Chris Gallavin. Good afternoon, Chris.
Kia ora, Harv. It's good to be in the metropolis of Fielding with you.
I know, it's good, eh?
It's great. It's pissing down, but it's the Manawatu does it. It does quality pissing down, doesn't it?
It does.
I mean, it does. It's sort of it's not ashamed of it. It owns it.
It's better than our summer. We're not pretending. And I asked Chris beforehand, do I call him professor? He said, no, but he's a professor. That's flash. Professor of what, Chris?
Professor, doctor. I've got a PhD in international criminal law. I did a PhD in England on prosecutorial discretion in the International Criminal Court, the ICC, which is based in Den Haag, in the Netherlands, and it looks at bad people. It investigates them and it tries them. It's sort of a flow on from the Rwandan Special Criminal Tribunal and then the Yugoslav Special Criminal Tribunal, and there was a call in the for a long time, but really came to a peak in the late 1990s for there to be a world court of sorts from an international side, rather than just merely sort of trade or disputes between countries. And so to be able to look at war crimes, genocide, crimes against humanity, and the crime of aggression, which is really covers the ambit of the jurisdiction of the court. And I decided that I would do my PhD in that.
Why?
Because I was, I suppose it touches a little bit half on my life story. I growing up I didn't know what I wanted to be. I thought I'd be a police officer at one stage. I'm from a pretty big family. I'm one of 8, but I'm the afterthought. So I've got 6 brothers, 1 sister. My sister Shane, Irish spelling Shane, was born profoundly intellectually handicapped, and she was born. So they're all much older than me. So my youngest 2 brothers, so 6 brothers, 1 sister. My youngest 2 are twins, and they're 10 years older than me, and my oldest brother's 21 years older than me. And so they were really of a different generation. And my mother, she was born in. Can I tell you a poem about my mother?
Go.
So I wrote a poem about my mother.
Because that's the other thing, you're a poet.
Well, look, poetry means a lot to me. It means a huge amount to me, because I feel, I'm Ngāti Pākehā, I'm not Māori, but I feel very jealous of that oral history storytelling tradition of Māori, because, Irish Catholic, and you could say, well, that is a great oral history there, but there's 2 types of Irish Catholic families, and there's ones that are so tight and tell each other all the stories going down the generations, and then there's the other that are wouldn't piss on each other if they were on fire, and absolutely don't talk about anything. Well, mine's very much the latter. So I drove last week to where my mother, one of 17, was born. It was a bright Otago day. And on the way, I stopped to stroll alone along the plots on the south side of Palmerston. I took my time and so stood with them, each laid flat before my feet in rows stacked one by one like neatly laid out streets. Later that summer's day, as the sun danced the fool's make-believe of water in the air, I pulled into her hometown of Dunback. 10 miles, give or take a mile and two, from my mutton pie and longest drink in town. Each worn-down headstoned home stood like a forgotten slab of stone, each marking the spot of a seed planted 6 feet down from whence sprung fruit full of memories past. The old stone lodging of my great auntie Julia May is now a pub, pulling spates across the bar and shillings from infrequent passers-by. Murphy Street, named after my great uncle Clarence, was full of hanging memories waiting to be plucked, but I continued on and drove toward the Pig Root Pass. It was not until maybe a mile or two out of town that I stopped to feast upon the overripened fruit that hung like garments on a forgotten washing line. And as I did, the image of my childhood mother appeared before my eyes, of her on her way to school with her father dear in the family jig. I gorged and fed upon visions long since laid to rest, and as I did, I looked towards the hills that rolled around my sides, and I could not help but see wire-bearded men, starched woolen suits of black and grey clothed every one of them, and though I saw those men as clear as I see you, I could not help but think of them, each as a seed, planted in their private rooms with calloused hands and bloodied brows, fob-watched every one of them, and amongst them all was my mother, a child once again, dementia having robbed her of the memory of my and my 7 siblings' birth. But she is happy now. Once again, that little girl, all ablaze in her father's eyes as she rides with him on her way to school. And he flicks the reins and winks at her and tells her of his time.
Bravo.
So my mother was born in 1930.
Just hang on. Just hang on. Hang on. Bravo. Lovely. 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 I really enjoyed that. Thank you.
Cheers.
Really enjoyed that.
That came from a trip back to Dunback, which was in from Palmerston South, on the Pig Route through to Naseby in 2010, where I took my mother, and dementia had just started kicking in. I always had a fraught relationship with my mother. She kicked me out when I was 16. And she was a tough, hard woman. Left home when she was 10.
She must have been quite old when she had you.
She was 43 when she had me.
Okay,
She died about 4 years ago.
Right.
So, she was old when she had me. And geriatric, they call it in birthing terms, a geriatric mother. I know that because my wife and I have 2 little ones, and that's how they kept on referring to my lovely wife, Cade, being around that 40 mark. And so I took my mother back to Dunback, which hadn't really changed at all from when she was there. And my Julia May Ryan is her name, and Julia May Murphy was her auntie, who ran the Dunback Lodge, which is Dunback is at the foot of the huge big open cast gold mine, I think the largest in New Zealand, Macrae's Flat. Beautiful part of the country.
It is. Yep.
Hasn't changed at all. And Mother took me to where the house she was born, and none of my brothers knew where that was. So we knocked on the door, and we went in. There was just a young farming couple who bought the house, and we had a look around, and a lot had changed. But it was very special to take my mother.
And she could remember enough?
She could remember all of that. She couldn't remember that trip about a week later.
Right.
And she went into a home. I put her into a home probably about 6 months after that. And then she was there for, I would say, 6 years before she died of complications associated with dementia, which had really completely... She ended up in a secure unit and was reverted back to really being a child and quite violent. But so I wrote that poem about that trip. And it's interesting because I've never really been... I was very close growing up with my mother. I was like an only child because I was the last. And my brothers were all... I was always a bit different. You know, I did tap dancing and for years and years and years as a kid. And my brothers were just like, you know, they all left home and school at 15, besides my oldest brother. And they were all very successful, and they're sort of tradesmen and they're mechanics or they're builders. and from Blenheim in the South Island. So I very strongly identify myself as from Te Waipuname, the South Island. And, we could all fix a Mark 1 Cortina on the side of the road, which I've had many occasions to do, but and very sort of practical. But I was sort of I sort of danced, I suppose, to my own tune. I was a bit different. I had a different father, so they were all my half-brothers and my half-sister, Shane, who was put in an institution by the time she was 5. So mother, she had all these kids, and they were almost all boys. The only girl she had was profoundly intellectually handicapped and taken off her. This was in the days of, that people with handicaps were often taken away from their parents. She was then drugged out of existence because she was an epileptic as well, and put in a place called Braemar in Nelson. And mother didn't really see her, didn't have the means by which to see her. Her first husband was a rabbiter on the rabbit board, so she lived on the Molesworth station. My oldest brother was born up there. She lived on the Molesworth station for years and years and years and years, and as a wife of a rabbiter, which was horseback in, horseback out, and all the cooking was done on a coal range. When my father came along, she married him, had me, divorced him, kicked him out pretty much, within a few months, and then she brought all of us up by herself on the DPB. She was very, very loving, and she was a good mother, but her favourite saying was, "I brought you into this world, I can take you out." And I can honestly say that, I don't feel as if I thought I knew her. I don't feel as if I know her at all, because all the stories that have come out since she's died about the fact that she had alcohol problems, that she had mental health problems as well, none of which I saw. That makes me think, because now I'm late 40s, and you think, yeah, I was born when mother was 43. She'd already lived a life, So, but we're all my brothers and I were all too much like her, She was born angry. You'd go and visit her. She was very, very loving and loved her grandchildren, what have you, but you'd walk in and she'd be sitting there stewing, looking at the TV with a clenched fist, and you go, "How are you, mother?" And we all called her mother as well. We didn't call her mum, mother. And she would be like, "What right do they have?" as she's waving her fist at the TV at some politician that's pissed her off. But nobody ever listened to her, half, because she was a woman and she was born in the era she was. She left school at 10, and because she had lots of kids. And that was a recipe. If one wasn't bad enough, quote unquote, then all those combined meant that she was not listened to, yet she had an incredibly strong will for justice. And she didn't tolerate anything. If anybody crossed us,
Look out.
like a teacher, she'd just march down. She'd be like the fist, "What right do you have?" And we're all a bit like that, which means that despite sometimes better judgment or what have you, we don't. None of us. We all speak out. None of us tolerate anything that we don't like seeing going on. We'll be the ones that make a noise about it.
Interesting, Chris, because my mother was late marrying, late having kids, mainly because I think she put it off as long as possible, and found a man who was like, they were complete opposites. But if in this day and age, there's no way my mother would have children. I don't think she would marry. She would have been a historian, happily cruising around the world doing historical shit. That's what she loved.
Oh,
She did not like being a mother.
Fascinating.
It was the thing to do. And I feel really, sorry for her in that respect. Or she had married 50 years later, born 50 years later, would have been quite different.
Yeah.
But and she had a life that she didn't enjoy a lot of the time. She enjoyed life more when she was older, after the old man died, after all the kids are buggered off, and she was happy as a pig in shit.
Yeah.
Reading and researching and all that sort of carry on. But great circle of friends. And people loved her. But I said, yeah, but you wouldn't want her as your mother. To be clear.
Yeah, interesting. See, my mother read a lot and did a lot of crosswords, but she wasn't an intellectual. She wasn't. She didn't research anything or study anything. She only left the country once. That was a visitor brother of mine who was working in South Australia, and she didn't really like that. She reluctantly ever had very rare occasion to go to the North Island. She would reluctantly go there as well. Her world was quite a narrow one, but a very full one. I mean, if you're going to bring up that many kids in a state house in Blenheim, let alone on the Molesworth station. But in Blenheim, by the time she had all of her kids by herself, and she always used to tell the story that I think that her first husband Acker Patchett came home, and I think he might have given her a back. It was back in those days that the 6 o'clock swill, and you come home to eat mutton, and yell at the wife, and the kids just sit there in complete subservience and abeyance. I think he might have slapped her or something, and she kicked him out. She wouldn't tolerate that. She was just not a person to be messed with, and that was probably a bit to our detriment in growing up, because we all fought with her. Like we all just she was very loving, but we all we would argue very, very badly.
Yep. So, Chris, how has this shaped you? Because you're different from your siblings or half siblings. Yeah.
Yeah, very much.
When did you realise that you were? No, I'm presuming you're different. But when did you start forming your own identity?
That's a really big question. When I was 13, I fell in love with an older woman. As you do. Yeah, that cliche sort of. I had a circle of. I bounced around friends, right? And when I was 13, I had a friend she was older than me by not a great deal, and she was a genuine friend of me and a couple of other guys. And she introduced me to The Cure, and I started to listen to The Cure, and that blew my head out of my ass. That'll do it. Because I played the guitar, and all my brothers play the guitar, and we were always, Rocky Mountain High in Colorado, and John Denver, and the Eagles, and what have you, and big jams, and what have you. So it's not a case that there was real friction necessary, especially growing up. It was they were my big brothers. I really looked up to them. I always felt as if they looked at me as if I was their half brother, but for me, they were my big brothers. And I even remember going to bed at night, sometimes wishing that my surname was Patchett and not Gallavin. I didn't want to be that. I wanted to be their sort of full brother. And so hearing The Cure for the first time, and then I became a goth in my teens. Yeah, like a pretty intense goth for quite some time. And I always used to worry about nuclear war. I suppose they'd call it, probably not even emos, that's probably even 2000. I don't know what they call these kids these days, but just sort of the slightly alternative kids. But in Blenheim, there's not a great deal of people to hang around.
So you were a goth in Blenheim?
Yeah.
That's not an ideal place to be a goth.
No, it's not. But I've always been very personal. I really like people, and I'm sort of engaged and polite, and was raised, to be, I wasn't a problem teen. I just stopped going to hairdressers to get my hair cut, and I got very, very curly hair, so I ended up being a huge, big mop. And I'd wear black with winkle pickers and skinny jeans when everyone's wearing flares, with a big sort of Celtic-looking cross around my neck, with a button-up black shirt. And I'd be listening to The Cure the whole time. And people didn't understand The Cure half. They didn't understand it. Not even Robert Smith of The Cure didn't really. When he put that Wish album out, which was a remix of everything, I was like, they just don't get it. They don't get their own music. I mean, just to tell you, I was very passionate. So then it was, Joy Division, and it was, the Smiths and Bauhaus and all of that sort of North England, Manchester type music scene. You could almost write the copybook. It's that stereotypical, you were a Smiths and The Cure and Joy Division kid.
But you were in Blenheim.
But I was in Blenheim. Yeah. This is all on tapes. This is all on tapes.
But this is the thing I'm just fucking killing myself over. It's just going, if you'd been in Northern England, that would be fine. You'd have other people to hang out with.
Actually, I was in the wine capital. Well, it wasn't wine capital then. I mean, we used to refer to Renwick as being Renwick rather than Renwick, which is the new group. Call it Renwick. And it didn't have any vineyards around. But it was hot. And it didn't rain a great deal, and life was probably pretty good. Really.
And Goss didn't go swimming, mate. Did you go swimming?
Yeah, I'd go swimming down the Wairau River, and I had a mate who had Spring Creek, and we'd bike out to his place, and then he had a rope swing out to, sort of quite a. I went to a country school because we lived on the outskirts of Blenheim. Everything's on the outskirts of Blenheim. It's not big enough to have an inskirt, is it? It's an outskirt. And so I went to, and it had a.
Is inskirts a word?
I don't know. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it had intermediate school, so I didn't go to Bahawley, which was the only intermediate. So I went straight from Riverlands to Marlborough Boys College, and man, I was just there to eat my lunch and stay out of fights. That was a rude awakening. That was 1,000 boys in uniform. I remember my first day, a prefect come past me and he spat a half-chewed Moro all over me and called me a turd, told me to fuck off. And I was like, is this high school? And I remember going home, my mother was like, what did you do that for? What did you do to him? You know, it was like I had to explain myself first. And then she cleaned me up and thought it was disgusting, but it was just like, you'll be right, get to school next day. And I was okay. So I was just average, you know, half. There's nothing spectacular about me. There's just absolutely
Well, this is a
average.
fucking problem because this podcast needs to be interesting.
Oh, sorry.
So we need to sort of lift the game a little bit.
Yeah,
maybe
okay.
maybe lie or something. Make it up.
Yeah.
So that was the first day at school. But so the cure, you're 13. The cure, the older woman. This is a time where you're starting to have your own identity. Is that how you describe it?
Very much. Yeah, worry about imminent nuclear catastrophe. I'm 49, born in 73, so we can do the math. I think 87 was when I started, so it's just on the brink of when things look like they're going to get worse before they get better. Francis Fukuyama saying the end of history when the Berlin Wall came down, which we'll probably talk about in a moment. But in 87, it was a very different kettle of fish, and I was intrigued by Russia and by communism. I did a lot of research on that as a student, but I wasn't an engaged student. I wasn't a nerd. I was absolutely Joe average. I was just a kid trying to find where I fitted in. So at college, I tried to, even because we're all uniform, so you can't look like a goth necessarily through the day. And I tried to hang out with the surfers and I tried to hang out with all the different the jocks and the rugby guys, because Blenheim's small enough too. You get invited to, because you know somebody, you get invited to a party and everybody's there.
Yeah.
But I just didn't really feel like I fitted in with any of them really. Not that I didn't feel necessarily a loner, but I'm the guy who, when I left high school, has never made any contact with anybody from high school ever again, because I was like, why would you do that? Whereas some people's entire lives have been framed by the positivity of high school, and I'm just not one of them.
Yep, even my generation, mate, we've got people that still refer back to and have got schoolmates as being the closest mates. I'm going, you fucking sad ass.
Yeah. I say, wonderful, that's amazing. I can't actually get my head around that. I can't get my head around that.
So end of school.
Then I started working for a place called Farm Machinery and Repairs, and I was just cleaned toilets and swept up, because that's where two of my brothers were diesel mechanics. And so I worked there for probably, I'm going to say I worked there for about 2 or 3 years, and on $3.45 an hour, I remember what I was on. And I'd been working there after school because one of my brothers was the foreman and had given me an after-school job. And then when school finished, I just carried on working there. And then I'd done for my 7th form year, because I went right through to 7th form, year 13. But the university was never really an option. And I'd done a couple of weeks' work experience at the courthouse. And then when I was and stayed in contact, and I would often work at Farm Machinery Repairs and then take a week off because I was sort of just casual. And then I'd do a week volunteering at the courthouse because I really enjoyed it. And after a couple of years or so, the registrar just rang me and he just said, do you want a job? I said, excuse me? He said, if you're free now, you can come down for your interview. So I went down literally with my hair out, which was down to probably my nipples by then, this big wad of curly hair with blue zip-up overalls and steel caps and covered in sort of grease and oil. And I just went down on my treadly, on my bike. And he sat me in the office and he said, congratulations, you're on the staff. So I started off as a clerk and I was there for 6 years. And so I was the guy sat in front of, so I was the sort of the criminal registrar. I sat in front of the judge and I did number 1 district court every 3 weeks.
Make sure the thing runs properly.
Did depositions and defended hearings and family court and, all the variations of how a court building runs and happens in a small town. So I ended up knowing everybody. Everybody knew me. The local gang, used to call me Waxhead, and they'd see me in town, and they'd go, "Oh, Waxhead, Waxhead, hey, I've got a thing coming up. What do you reckon? What do you reckon?" I go, "Oh, what have you been doing?" "Oh, yeah, we got done last week." I go, "What? Pull your bloody head on." I said, "What do you think? You're asking me how you think you're going to get on the defended hearing, and you've just got done for flipping smoking weed out the back of the Criterion last week." I'm like, "Come on, what, you dumbass or something?" And I could get on with them really, really. I'm personable, and I strike up a rapport. And so at 24, I decided I'd go to university. And so I did. I went down to Canterbury, shitting bricks, because I was like, this is probably not me, and it's not going to work. But
Mate, that's a big change. So I was just, that's, so you stayed in the same place. You left school, stayed in the same place.
yeah,
And then, so at what point did you?
not dissimilar to Fielding, to be honest.
Yeah. But what point did you think? Because you've got going to university is breaking out. Nobody else in your family would have gone to university.
No.
Yeah.
No. Yeah. I was very much charting my own course then. Look, my mother kicked me out when I was 16. When by the time I was
Why?
Well, I've been paying rent and board since I was 13, because I was working after school, and she was like, "You're paying board if you're gonna." I think. Well, look, I've thought about that. It wasn't any particular thing. It was quite acrimonious, but it was sort of just like, "You're now 16. You're a man. Get out." So I did my last year of high school flatting. Yeah.
Okay, so you go to Canterbury.
Yeah, I went to Canterbury. Actually, I'll just tell you, just a precursor to that. When I was 19, by the time I got to 19, my mother had got to the stage of sort of, we were talking then, and she was like, "You're not eating properly, so every Monday you can come around, you can have roast chicken." So I remember I was there with my girlfriend at the time, and she came out with the roast chicken, and it was Monday night, and I said to her, "I met and had a beer with the old man on the weekend." And my father had never been mentioned ever. "You're just like your bloody father" was the only line I'd ever heard my mother ever mention my father, right? But he'd retired in Renwick, and my half-sister on that side rang me at work and said, "This is your half-sister Vicky, we'd like to meet you. Do you want to come out and have a cup of tea?" So I went out and had a beer with him, actually. I was only there for about an hour. And he was all right. I said, "Oh, I met the old man on the weekend. I had a beer with him." And she was putting the chicken down on the table, and before it touched, she just picked it up, and she just said, "Well, if you want anything to do with that bastard, you don't have to have anything to do with me. Get out." And I didn't speak to her for 4 years. So I went to university when I was 24, to get back to your question, and I just found it blew my head out my ass. Within a year, I remember I was like, these people just don't think like me. They don't have world horizons like me. They're talking about salaries and doing things in the holidays that are just not ever been on my radar. Their parents are engineers and doctors and lawyers, and they talk about the world. And I've never been overseas. I knew once a friend of a friend of a friend at school who went to Sydney. It was about. I thought that was the world. I didn't know. I hardly ever read any books in my growing up. I'd just been out my BMX, as a
But you were aware of the Russians.
I was
aware. And you were aware of the cure.
Yeah, I was aware of those two.
Yeah.
And I was aware of that England was this mythical place that was always gloomy and had graveyards and was a really cool place to hang out.
And you would have been an old student.
24, I felt very old. Yeah. Well, I was older. I mean, I wasn't in the 30 bracket, which were then probably...
But a little bit older. Yeah, there would have been other kids there your age.
Yeah.
But starting off at 24, that makes you unolder.
And there was 600 in my first year in law. And I remember by the end of the year that I was pissed off that I was ranked something like number 3 in the class, because I was pissed off because I wasn't number 1. And I was annoyed because I knew that there would be nobody who wanted it more than me. So I'm not... I always go into when I talk to kids at schools, I say, I'm not necessarily bright. I'm not going to be false humility. I am bright. I know I'm bright, but I'm not. There'll be people. You'll probably have a higher IQ than I do. And the world's full of bright people. But the thing that I am is that I'm mentally disciplined and I'm very focused and I'm very driven.
Mm.
And there will be very few people that I ever come across that will be quite as driven as me,
Mm.
you know. And I don't have interests, I have obsessions.
Mm.
And I just need to be a master of it. You know, I went through and did my tap dancing. I did every single one at the exam, won, you know, national championships, all that type of stuff. And then on to the next thing, you know, poetry, you know, I recited that to you off the top of my head. I can recite about 300 poems off the top of my head. I'm not seen to be satisfied by one or two. I need to.
And that's discipline.
I say it's discipline. My mother, I remember she would always, we never had an alarm clock in the house. She'd sit me on the end of the bed, and if we had to get up early in the morning, I don't know, get a ferry or something like that, or for whatever it might have been, she'd just say to me and look me in the eyes and say, "We're going to get up at 2 o'clock in the morning." Say that after me. We're going to get up at 2 a.m. We're going to get up at 2 a.m. We're going to get up at 2 a.m. And I'd always wake up at 2 a.m. and so would she, and we'd never have an alarm clock. And she would just be like, it's discipline of the brain, you know. Just tell yourself. And I tell you what, of all the things that my mother did or did not do for me, it's that stuck with me. Now, there's nothing that doesn't. I just, like, through sheer grit will make myself either understand things or get through things.
And you don't sleep much now?
No, 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 I don't know. You're drawing a correlation that I've never thought about before, but I go to bed late and I can get up early and I can function. I can actually. It's strange, you know. There's probably some sort of matrix that talks about you being young and strong, and therefore you're high on that, but full of shit and no wisdom. And then when you're in your 80s, you're not very strong, but you're full of wisdom. And they coincide at some stage, and it's probably around your mid 40s to perhaps your early 50s. I'm presuming. And so,
Fact of I think I missed it.
And so, I'm fearful that there is a day going to come where I can't do that stuff. But I still do 24-hour sessions if I have to, if I've got a lot of work to get on and do. And then when I do go to bed, I will just get up at the same time and I will just have foregone that sleep and I'll be okay about it. And if I feel tired, I'll tell myself I'm not tired.
That is a thing.
Yeah.
Yep, that is a thing. I'm a bugger when I get tired and I focus about I'm tired and I just feel tired. But if you recalibrate, it's amazing how you can change that.
I think the quid pro quo for not having a heart attack or falling over is that, for me anyway, that means you have to be really quite self-aware. So I can then feel the things because I do have to sleep, and I can only handle a certain amount that's going on. But I like to think I've got a fairly good internal radar as to when, hey, look, actually, I need to. I've lost some objectivity. Or some perspective on this issue and this is showing me that actually I'm quite stressed or I'm quite tired or I'm a bit overdone or I'm close to burnout. I need to back off, and that internal radar has only come from many circumstances where I've gone over the edge. You know, I've never had a breakdown per se, but in times of my life where I'm just like, whoa, I'm totally overwhelmed. And so what that means is that I've banked that, I've got the knowledge of that, and now I know there are very, very few circumstances, I should be touching wood, there are very, very few circumstances that I could think of that could be thrown at me than which would throw me off my stride.
Just going back, I'm fascinated about this obsession thing. Tell me about that.
Look, at the moment I'm trying to lose a little bit of weight, and my wife's going to the gym. She said, "Oh, you should go to, you could start up with me. We could go to the gym sessions together." And then she paused and she said, "No, because you'll get fanatical about it." And I go, "Yeah, I will." And I used to be fanatical about the gym and fitness and I wanted to do the coast to coast, but I picked up an injury in it through my training, and I'm very well aware that I get fixated, and I don't know if it's. I'm not going to say whether I'm going to be agnostic as to whether it's a strength or a weakness, but it's a thing that I do, and so I have to be very careful about it. But I'm a curious person, so I'm curious about people, and I'm curious about stories, and I'm curious about intellectual things, which means that, you know, some of the other things we might get onto, either it's creative stuff or the state of the world is at the moment, I dive very deeply into various areas and try and bring that knowledge together and I think hard about things all the time to a fault. In fact, sometimes I really wish that my downtime wasn't poetry, but it would be something I could do with my hands, because I used to do a lot of exercise, I used to do a lot of stuff, but now I found myself more and more sort of work, and then when I'm not doing work, I'm still intellectualizing things. That's who I am.
Look, it's interesting. A collective intelligence member sent me a video recently, because she knew I was struggling with not switching off, and it was a guy talking about just this and saying, you've got to make sure that the thing you do on your downtime is vastly different from what you do at work. And, you know, the irony is I took on some local work last year with a local charity to give back to the community. It was a complete fucking waste. It was not a waste. It was the completely wrong thing for me to do.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't far enough away from work.
Yeah.
And so, you know, this morning I've been building something for my wife, and she woke up this morning. She knows, so I don't think I'm obsessive, but she knows not to tell me something or bring something into a conversation if she's not prepared to do it.
Yeah.
Because she learnt that when she brings something up and go, oh fuck, he's doing it, right? Because if I go, that's a good idea. Okay, let's start doing that. And so if I have an idea, I think it's a good idea, right? And of having to learn that maybe it's not a great idea, maybe somebody else has got a better idea and something. But for a long time, if I had an idea, it's a good idea. If it's a good idea, I should do it. And so I start doing it. But I've learnt now to listen to other people a bit more and happy to be challenged and all that. So not always, but it still grates me. But it's just like, that's a good idea.
Look, I'm laughing because I know exactly where you're coming from, because and the way that's manifest difficulty in my life is actually through relationships with women. Because I've had to learn and I'm still learning that sometimes you've got to have conversations with people. I'm not just going to say women, I'm gross generalize women, but this is the circumstance in which it has arisen in my life for me to learn this lesson, and that is that sometimes you've got to talk through things without actually leaping to the conclusion and leaping to a solution, quote unquote, and then executing that solution all within the 20 minutes of the person bringing up something, you know. I'm not the saviour that needs to fix everybody's problem.
So here we go. Here I'm going to drop this in. You sent through an email to me and Meg yesterday. Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
And I'm going, the fuck do you send that through, you fucking noble prick? Right? I'm just going, who the fuck asked for this opinion, right? And it was classic. I'm reading and going, okay, all right, well, we need to fucking talk this through because
I have to slow my head down. Because I'm jumping 5 steps all the time. And the nice thing you have is that we can have those kind of conversations.
Absolutely.
You know, you can kick me under the table or kick me above the table if you want to. And I'm like, yeah. No, I hear that and I know that, because it's feeding into exactly what we've just articulated is a trait of both of us. And
don't fucking bring me into it. Oh.
Hey, I keep another thing that's important to me. I keep a little. It's not a diary. It's a little journal. These little black books.
Yeah.
I've got sort of 25 of them, and they take about 8 months or so to.
And you've just opened it. What are you going to put in there?
Oh well, what about you?
Oh.
I don't know. I'll put it down here. I fill it with things.
Do you want my address? Do you want my phone number?
Yeah, exactly. I've got your phone number. I fill it full of things that I quite like. I'm not a motivational saying person, but I do collect a few of them. You know, I don't know. Theodore Roosevelt, 1899. Better to dare mighty things and achieve glorious triumphs, although checkered by failure, than to take rank with the poor souls that neither suffer much nor enjoy much, for they live in the grey twilight that knows neither victory nor defeat. And you know, it's things like that. You know, it's like,
mate, that's you know, that bloody poem, mate. That just, I was brought up with that. My old man used to recite that poem to me, over the dinner table.
Yeah.
And he did that because we both loved tennis, both played tennis.
Yeah.
And that is the motto of Wimbledon, to meet victory and defeat and treat those two
Oh, is
imposters
that
the
right?
same. It's fucking
Oh, is that right?
written across there. That's not exactly the right way, right? But that is the motto of Wimbledon.
yeah.
And I think it's just the most wonderful,
Amazing.
wonderful thing, because so often I watch people watching sport and going, they're not even watching the fucking game. They're so concerned about winning or losing.
Yeah.
They cannot see
Yeah.
the beautiful thing that's out there on the field or the court or whatever, right? And they miss what's going on. And it's just, if they lose, it's, and they get this euphoric thing about they won or whatever, and just going, you missed the game. You miss all the subtleties.
That's so poignant, because that feeds into, I mean, again, I don't want to sort of string a whole lot of quotes together, but I love the old philosophers and study them deeply. And Soren Kierkegaard has got one that, life is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be experienced. And he's the father of existentialism. He was trying to say, and I'm quite an existentialist, and that is... somebody who realizes that happiness sadness and misery and sorrow and what have you is just as legitimate as happiness and kindness and everything else. It's all part of the rich tapestry of the, as James K. Baxter said, he'd worked his life and had never found the answer to the human condition. It's just part of the human condition. I mean, I remember even as a teenager watching a movie, and I don't even remember what it is now, and it had an old black and white one, and it was had this Italian, young, most beautiful looking Italian man, and he was with his grandmother, this wizened, deeply wrinkled, experienced woman, and he was crying and crying, and his head was in her lap, and she was stroking his hair, and he was crying because his heart had been broken for this relationship. And she said to him, "Enjoy it while you can. It won't last long." And I'm just like, it's all part of the rich tapestry. Don't just focus on the winning. Watch what the hell the game is about, You just gotta, it is what it is, and this eternal strive for being happy and content and what have you. Just sometimes you gotta ride the waves, and you just gotta realize this is all part of the journey, mate.
And one of the wonderful things of getting old is that when things are going well, you appreciate it more. It's just like, fuck yeah, and you notice it, right? Because there are lots of times in my early life I just didn't notice shit. I went for years without noticing a fucking thing. Yeah. It was just about being busy, working hard, doing my thing, but now it's when things are going well, it's just like, this is cool. This is cool right here, right now. This is cool.
See, I can hear what you're saying, and I quite strive towards that. But I'm still a wee way off. I'm still looking at that slightly.
If my wife was listening to this, she'd say I am too. But
well,
luckily she doesn't listen to this shit.
I suppose what I'd say is my goal and my drive within me is at base because I'm some sort of discontent. I'm probably making up for something deeply broken within inside me. Is now an appropriate time to cry? Is that, we should be holding hands.
The good thing is I'm not going to put this up. Nobody's going to listen to this. This is fucking...
Well, actually, I'm thinking we haven't even got onto any really stuff
we've got to
talking about. Who wants to learn it? Who wants to hear this? This is all bullshit. This is boring. I'm going to surpass the one other you said was probably nobody would be interested in. Nobody's going to be interested in this one, mate.
So, Chris, you went to law school, you were third, you fucking got pissed off with that you weren't first and all that sort of stuff. Is there anything else that's interesting in your journey before we get on to what we're supposed to be talking about?
No, I don't think so.
I've
had wonderful children, and they are the light of my life. Spent a lot of time living in England, and then met my wife while I was living in the States as a professor at Georgetown for a time in Washington DC. Managed to be able to travel the world and do projects and engage with amazing people, and then started in 2013 with about 9 others, a multidisciplinary sort of think tank group called the New Zealand Centre for Global Studies, with the likes of Kennedy Graham, Klaus Bosselman, who's the head of the Environmental Law Centre in Auckland, but as the father of Earth trusteeships in the UN, so has done a huge amount of work with the General Assembly on that, and a whole bunch of it. Rod Oram, So Rod and I,
Right.
that's where we both are still from 2013, started this enterprise up. And we sort of do sort of high level, sort of think tanky, quite academic writing on global, interdisciplinary global issues from a New Zealand perspective. So quite, very intellectual. But I love it. I love it. I get to rub shoulders and engage with people who don't necessarily think like me or from my own discipline. And I like that. I define myself. I've been a Dean of Law. I've been, the Christchurch earthquake was a huge time for me. I define myself by my connection with my community, and I went on sabbatical. And while I was away, the place was fucked. So I came back. I wasn't even part of the collective trauma. Everybody suddenly had this earthquake story that I didn't have. Then my marriage had split up. I was quite discombobulated. I was like, what on earth? And I suddenly realised I was quite a Chardonnay socialist because I got really upset at my local cafe where I went to Eggs Benedict and the coffee in the weekend had fallen over. And I suddenly realised that how much of the built environment was about, it defined physically in a way of how much my being was when I'd never thought that it had. So I went through a very different, I was like, oh my goodness, what's my role? To be the best lecturer I can be, to be the best academic, to actually go and shovel silt with the students? Is it to become a politician? Is it to get into local body or national politics, or what is it? And then I got thrust, and it was a bit of a thrust into being the Dean of Law down there. And so then was like, right, well, if we need
You would have been quite young to be Dean of Law?
Yeah, I was 38. It was way before I was ready and way before I had the skill or experience, knowledge or self-reflection to be able to do the job, to be honest. But I threw myself into it and it became me. I couldn't define myself separate to being that role. And it was a very successful time, and but Christchurch and the university and the law school were not places to go in that immediate aftermath. And I was going out there and saying, why would you want to be anywhere else? This is where all the bad shit's going on.
Yep.
This is where broken communities.
Yep.
If you want to be involved in something, especially as a student, if you want to get pissed and whatever, go to Otago, go to another place. I'll write my speech to first year law students was, if you're here to do all that other stuff, then that's fine. Let's have a conversation about you moving to another university, because this ain't the place for you. This is the place where you're going to roll up your sleeves and get your hands dirty with real people with real problems. And if you're up for that, great. If you're not, then let's just do us all a favour and get you out of here. And of course, they're all 18 and impressionable. They're all like, yeah.
But, I look at, that launched Sam Johnson's career.
Well, yeah, Sam was a law student, so I know Sam well. And of course, the successive presidents of the Student Volunteer Army for a number of years were all law students. And so in some sort of way, not to try and piggyback on their success, but I played a role of helping with the mentoring. But I make no secret of the fact I learnt more from the students through that time than what they would have learnt from me. Yeah, they would have learnt where the statutes are and what case precedent is for whatever criminal principle. But actually what really matters is I learnt from them. I found that such an invigorating time, because I realised that while everybody was poo-pooing this latest generation as being self-centred and not concerned about wider issues or having a heart or empathy, and they were just stuck to their tablets and they didn't have a conversation, that showed the exact opposite, that actually young people, like good human beings in Aotearoa, New Zealand, are passionately concerned and energised by making a difference in their community. And so that's where my vision of what a future of university needs to be, which in a nutshell is engaged with government, civic society and industry to be able to resolve collective problems that we face that on our individual enterprise we find it difficult to resolve. If a university isn't, there's not some degree factory, which they've turned into. It really annoys me that they've become a perpetuator of the status quo. They're meant to be these hive of activity. Everyone goes to universities thinking they're all going to be sitting around, discussing Nietzsche and how it's relevant. No, they're not. Most people go there and just go, what's my next assignment that I have to do and hand in? It becomes very functional and very, very hand to mouth to just get from one day to the next through your lectures and in the easiest way possible. So it's lost that. It's long since lost that. And now I get annoyed that it's very much about, well, we're training, widgets for perceived widget size holes in industry. Because now industry is saying, well, we don't want the widget size holes. So many industries, we don't even really know what we want. All we know is that there's chaos out there, and that's the new norm, and we need people who can deal with chaos. So they need to be good communicators and collaborators and critical thinkers and creative thinkers. They need to be able to handle their own well-being. We need to all be able to sort of just like hold ourselves together in a time when anxiousness is going through the roof, and we need somebody who's got some action.
And they need to notice how they are, which is what you talked about before, right? In this time of fucking chaos, how am I doing? You know, can I function?
Oh,
All that sort of stuff, because we're seeing it with our work, Chris, that through the COVID disruption, we're seeing people whose behaviour is appalling, and appalling in that it's childlike. It's not productive. It's petulant. It's there's all sorts of shit coming out, and people's behaviour to actually not be a good human being to other people, and it's we've seen a rise. I think it's related to COVID. I go, 1 + 1 = 2. It might not be, but people not being able to monitor how they are at the moment. And actually, one of the things we've noticed with our work is when you ask people, how are you feeling? And it's a pet hate of mine. Good. I go, well, good's not actually a feeling, so how are you feeling? And people actually being able to go, how am I feeling at the moment? And I think it's a critical piece to teach kids, how are you feeling?
Yeah.
What's going on in your body?
We don't even have the skills to answer that question, though, do we? I mean, we don't learn that at school, and some of us didn't really learn it at home. It was just suck it up, put another jersey on, take a concrete pill and harden up type of attitude. The biggest thing that I could have ever been insulted with when I was growing up was being was the phrase, what are you?
Right.
Because that was soft. That means you're soft. I mean, actually, the full phrase, what are you, a pufter? And I didn't even know what that meant when I was a kid until I was in the late teens. All I knew it meant was that you were somehow soft, and soft was really bad, and none of me or my mates wanted to. You could call us anything, but don't call us soft. Was framed my life as a South Island male New Zealander so strongly. And when my brothers would go, what are you? That...
Fuck, I've forgotten about that term.
Oh, man, that cut me to the... It was just like, I'm being told I'm somehow soft.
And you don't fit.
Yeah.
You don't fit here.
Yeah.
And don't fucking do that tap dancing on that bloody poetry and shit like that.
When I started, my mother said, well, you do know your brothers are going to think you're a pufter. And I was like, oh, well, I want to do it, Mum. And then she goes, okay, but don't say I didn't warn you. And it was just like, and again, I didn't know what the word pufter meant. I had no idea. No,
but
absolutely.
It was not good.
All it was it meant that you were somehow different and soft.
Yeah.
And those were bad things. Yeah. Those were not what I was meant to be. And so we don't have, when anybody asks you, how are you? You don't have, there's not even a framework by which to go through and try and say, I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed at the moment. I don't even know what that means. Overwhelmed? I'm busy. At most it gets up, I'm pretty busy at the moment. Yeah. It's like, phew,
well, so that's another one that I get pissed off with people who say, oh, are you busy? And I say, I work too fucking hard to be busy. And I mean that. Yeah. I don't want to be busy.
Yeah.
And it's just lazy.
I haven't got a work balance, let alone a work-life balance. Let's just start with, I suppose I do a lot of speaking to high schools, and I say finding your passion is not a ticket to an easy life. It's the ticket to driving yourself harder than you've probably
sometimes crazy.
It's sometimes crazy. Like the All Blacks, they go training, they don't go for a leisurely jog around the block. They push themselves beyond what they think their breaking point is. And my experience is that people's breaking points are nowhere near where they think they are, and you do need to be pushed. And sometimes that's finding your passion. But for me, the thing that I find most difficult is it's got to have some logical end, or it's got to have some framework around it, that you don't just push for the sake of pushing until you break. Until it's not actually a line to be striven for.
Yeah.
Of being a. So anyway, I'm not sure how we got onto that, but
there was also another piece. You mentioned the line. We've worked with people who are striving for something, and then pointing out you're over that line. You've finished that some time ago, but you're still pushing forward. The thing you were striving for, you've done. Oh, okay. So now we need to recalibrate and look at what is. And it's been interesting. I've come across that numerous times.
That's me exactly. I've never gone to a graduation of any of my degrees because it's been passed and it's done. I never really take any comfort in having achieved a goal, because by the time I've achieved it, I'm on to the next goal. It's become habitual to create goals to push. This is all sounding quite negative about me, isn't it? Really, but it's honest. It's honest and it's genuine, and that is something that I challenge.
Do you think that's negative? What you've just said?
Well, it's critical. It's self-critical. It's realistic.
That's not negative, though. Self-critical is not negative.
Well, again, it's so deeply in my psyche to be seen as weak and soft. It's because weak and soft mean the same thing, right? What are you? It's so deep within my psyche that I do think I'm vulnerable, and I've worked hard to be self-reflected and shown vulnerability, but that's at a level that I accept, that I can handle. It's probably not that I allow to happen.
Champagne vulnerability.
the Chardonnay socialist. So the
Chardonnay socialist. Yeah.
So the
and champagne's the wrong word, but it's because vulnerability it's a new thing, right? But it's because being vulnerable, what are you, right? Just clam all that shit up, right, and put on the facade and push back.
Yeah.
As quickly as possible.
Yeah. You'd never show a tear or any type of weakness. That would instantly, what are you? Or what my mother would say was, what would your brothers think of you?
That's brutal. So
she was loving. She was a hard woman, man. She was born in 1930 in a house that's got no electricity, and you go to school on horseback. And you got 16 siblings. You're one of 17. And you're Catholic, Irish Catholic. I mean, life's meant to be hard, isn't it? I mean, that's that whole, James K. Baxter said, that New Zealand sort of Calvinistic, sex is bad, work is good, do as you're told and you'll be okay, and whatever you do, don't look too far into yourself. Life, if things are going really well, you're actually doing something wrong, Harv, because life's meant to be shit. You're not getting the memo, mate. You're not getting that type, that resonates to me as an aspect of New Zealand society that very much I was brought up in.
Yep. So here's this is left field. One of my favourite memories of the last 12 months was Lydia Coe finishing. It was the last day. She'd made the cut. She was in the top 3 or 4, and she's going round and she's got a sore back, and her caddy's rubbing her back. And she carries on, and she's just not playing that well, and the others are, and whatever. And the interview here, I'm not sure if you saw it, the interview at the end goes, so Lydia, you've, obviously you're a bit sore, sore back, thinking it was muscular, and her caddy was male, and saying, you're obviously, a bit sore, and she goes, well, yeah, it's that time of the month to this, and she looks at the camera and she goes, and we all know what that's like, ladies, it was this lovely moment, and the guy interviewing had no fucking idea what to say with that. I'm not sure how I would respond, but I hope it was better than him, because he was just like, we're not talking about that. You're supposed to have sore muscles, and it was just the most beautiful moment for me, watching this phenomenal professional sports person being so normal and talking about what was real. in that moment. And I thought it was wonderful that her male caddy was trying to give her comfort, knowing what was going on. I'm going, that's cool. The fact she's still having a period as a professional sportswoman, so many don't. I'm going, that's cool. But it was just so fucking real. And she could have said anything but that. She could have masked all that, which is what we've done forever.
Yeah.
Instead, she talked about what was really going on.
Yeah.
And how we've got to get better at that stuff.
Oh, I mean, I've got little girls. I don't have little boys, but you know, so much what we're facing in society is actually indictment of how we raise males, as much as it is anything else. Yep. I mean, my wife and I were talking about this in a more general sense last night. We were talking about the so-called cultural war, and I'm reading. I read a lot of stuff that's out of my political comfort zone in order to be able to sharpen myself up and to really challenge myself. Well, what is it? What is it? Not in the round and not by cliches, but what exactly is it that I think, and how do I exactly articulate that in a nuanced and credible and logical way? And how do I put words to some of these ideas that we're talking about? Because the things that I read are saying, everything's going to hell in a handbasket, and the ideals. You know, there's a book by Victor Hanson that I'm reading at the moment. He's a professor at Stanford. It's called The Dying Citizen, and it says why. This is something like the byline is that why tribalism, identity politics, and tribalism is destroying the notion of the traditional notion of America, right? And it's from the playbook of, and it's not without some logic, you know. It's not without, it would be so easy to be able to dismiss these things by just saying, oh, well, they're racist, or giving them some label. But actually, when you get into it, there is a very well articulated, and it's got some grounds and basis, you know, so it's not easy to dismiss. You actually have to make a real study of it. It's like talking to a Jordan Peterson type thing.
Yep.
Really logical, analytical, very well thought out and articulated. And if you're going to go into bat with people like that, which I hope to, and do, then you've got to be on your game, right? But what I find, I suppose, one of the big driving feelings for me behind this is that white males have had it. Well, we still do. Let's not pretend that we're somehow on the bottom of the rung, you know.
We've only got it 20% as good as females at the moment, though, maybe 20 or 30%.
So all these writers are saying, oh, look what's happening, and it's dividing, and it's racism, and it's dividing the country, and having a look at the things to do with whether it's Three Waters or Māori health or Māori education. Oh, it's racism, and you're trying to create it smacks like the bully in the playground who's pushed and 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 had it all their own way, and everybody's in subservience. And as soon as somebody stands up and says, that's bullshit, I'm going to call it out, and I think we should be able to do something a bit different, they're like, ugh. They're suddenly, typical bully action thing, what are you getting so upset about? Oh, you're quite divisive and, you know, creating a problem here, aren't you? And actually, it's just the years and years and years of stepping over the line and being arseholes about almost everything you could possibly imagine. We are so blind to the damage we've created because everything conforms with everything about how we see the world. And as soon as it doesn't, suddenly it's a big problem. And so I'm not saying that that's just free license to be able to do what we want and different thoughts and what have you, and they shouldn't be critiqued. But that, I suppose, is my starting position. It's like, perhaps I've got something more to learn from Māori than what Māori have to learn from me. That's a pretty radical, I think that's a pretty radical thing for a middle-aged white person of intelligence to say, you know? And I'm trying to live it, you know? Perhaps I do have, I'm not Māori, I'm Ngāti Pākehā, but perhaps, whether it's through the oral history, it's a storytelling history, which I marvel at, and with the storytelling, you said, you were raised in a household where your parents or your father or your grandfather could recite some prose or what have you, the stories of the narratives of who we are as a community. Well, Māori do that all the time, and perhaps we could borrow from that. I mean, if this is the pinnacle society, if this is the pinnacle of, not to say that it's all going to hell in a handbasket and there hasn't been some good things, but if this is the pinnacle, and we're saying ourselves that we can't do better, it's like, Samuel Johnson said in 1835, the person who can't say sorry today is the person who can't acknowledge they got it wrong. They could do better than what they did yesterday. I mean, perhaps we could all just learn. It's not one or the other, you know. It's not saying that white males don't have a place, but perhaps the place can be part of, as opposed to just being the thing that everything conforms to. So that goes for hate speech, it goes to gender identity, it goes for decolonisation calls, it goes for partnership. You know, the word partnership is something that it seems that if I want to use the patriarchy as that if you'd be a radical you'd call it, but if you say the establishment, partnership is, let alone anything more sophisticated than partnership, you know, if it's actually collaboration involving more. It's like asking somebody, how are you? We've not trained anybody or nurtured people to even be able to begin to answer that question. You want to talk about partnership? Well, is it any wonder that people are kicking against it? Because they don't even have the vocabulary. There's nothing in the last 100 years, really, that has even prepared us for the notion of what true partnership or collaboration would be. That's what excites me, and I love to write about that stuff and think about it deeply, and to bring in and not make a demon of the Victor Hansons or the Petersons or even the Steven Pinkers or the Yuval Hararis, who I greatly respect, and not making an enemy of anybody. You know, the Francis Fukuyama's The End of History, or the Patrick Denham's who are writing on the end of liberalism, but actually trying to just be a good magpie and bring together some of the aspects of really good thinking that you see around things in order for us to be able to grow the whole and to grow the middle and to grow our understanding and for us to actually get on a little bit better. Because of all this lizard brain stuff, which is often, you know, the reactionary, people behaving badly that wouldn't normally have behaved badly, but are just reaction because they've not got the vocabulary or the ability, we're not created in the environment where we can understand what's going on with us. And how does it make us feel that we've been on lockdown for 3 years, as opposed to just lashing out and sort of finding someone to blame? You know, sending nasty things about Jacinda Ardern or other politicians. I mean, who the hell would want to be a politician?
When I'm being in a particularly difficult mood and somebody's spouting on about something and I think, oh, this is a bit wanky, and I just say, what evidence have you got of this?
Oh, well, we've got so much evidence, though. We've got so much evidence. I mean, having said that, look, I think you make a very good point, because in a lot of the books that I read who say everything's going to hell in a handbasket, they are incredibly analytical when they try and look at their methodology as beyond repute when they applying it to themselves. But when they're applying it to anybody else, they go, oh yeah, they're all just, it's all anecdote and they've got no evidence of anything. But then they go and rely on the very thing that they've criticised everybody else by saying it's all going to hell in a handbasket, And they say, look at social media, as if that's somewhere our bellwether for everything, that whereas the middle person in New Zealand or even America is at. It isn't. So that then in the States is a perfect, I call it the problem of the United States, which is the things have become so out of balance that it's just everybody speaks in ever-increasing thundertones against one another and uses the extreme of the thundertones on the other side to justify their ever-increasing demonising of it. So you ask a really good question, and what actually is the state of play on the ground?
Yep.
And I'm trying to go through that at the moment. And I think it starts off by saying, well, let's try and take a bit of a look as to where we are and what we have done, because the likes of Steven Pinker and Yuval Harari, they say a few things, and they say war is over, famine has been resolved, health issues are sorted out, and educational achievements are through the roof. The Gordon Roberts of the world who talk about American growth, they point out that from 1870 the average age of can't remember what it was, something like 40 years of age, and then by 1970 it was 72 years of age. It's not to say that war and famine and pestilence or medicine, we don't have problems there. Of course we do. We just had a pandemic. People are dying of starvation, but they're not dying anywhere near. We're not killing people in war. War's still a problem, but we're not killing people in war anything like we did 100 years ago.
No.
So they all start off from the position of, let's just all agree that we're all in a pretty good situation. And therefore, anybody who's screaming is just talking about the things on the periphery, you know. They're talking about statues coming down or decolonisation. They're just trying to find something to argue about and be a contrarian. That's their position, because they say, what's the evidence? And the evidence is clear that actually Western civilization is doing all right. That's the position they come from. And I think that needs a bit of scrutiny, because I don't want to deny that, yeah, there's been amazing things. Indoor toilets from it's a general mark that 1870 onwards was when all the big things happened. Electricity in houses, for refrigeration, toilets and sanitary conditions, you know, and we figured out that we probably should keep hospitals clean to avoid infection. Those are the penicillin, you know.
You know, it's a little bit controversial, but, you know, and it comes back to the thing that I wrote down at the beginning was one of the things you wanted to talk about. So I'm just going to name it, and I think that's what we're talking about now is the freedom of thought. Okay?
Yeah.
And so I listened to Mike King on, you know, his crusade with suicide and so forth. Right? And he's got a big following, and he's doing some good and he's doing some harm. And I won't get into those specifics today, but the suicide numbers come out and they'd fallen. And he comes out and refutes it and goes, that's absolute bollocks and whatever. And people go, they're hiding this and hiding that. And I'm going, why would the chief coroner hide this? Why would they do that and go and examine that and go and talk to a few people who actually deal with these things and go, what's happening to the suicide rate? Oh, no, they've dropped. You know, through COVID, suicide rates dropped. Huh, okay, that's interesting. And why would that be? Now, that doesn't suit Mike King to acknowledge that, because he's on this crusade that we've got this thing that is rampant. And it's not, you know, it's bad in New Zealand. I'm not saying it's good. But we sometimes get too scared to fucking scratch behind the surface and go, is that true? Is that, you know, and going, oh, I'm not sure, you know, does that bear scrutiny? And then what is going on with those numbers? And what's, you know, there is, I think, I get frustrated where people are, one, bias eats intelligence, just fucking chomps it up, right?
Yep.
So Jordan Peterson is bad, chomp, 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 right?
Yep.
Well, he's a very bright, articulate guy, and he's got some really good points, you know? And there are people there who've got really good points. And we need to fucking be able to listen to them and go, oh yeah, is that bad? Oh yeah, that's interesting. And mush them all up and actually come out with your own thoughts, because I like having my own thoughts, and I get frustrated when I think I'm just repeating somebody else's thoughts. And I go, is that my thought, or am I just parroting that to sound good or smart or something? We're actually mushing them all up and go, what do I think? Because that takes some effort.
Yeah.
And I don't think I'm very good at it. I think I'm lazy too, that I because it does take effort.
Look, I've thought a lot about this. I mean, a lot of the people I've sort of looked up to, the Christopher Hitchens of the world, the Richard Dawkins of the world, who you know, all as long, you know, right back even to the philosophers of, you know, John Milton and you know, Machiavelli and all of them have said, John Locke, John Stuart Mill, the greatest danger of our time is that so few of us dare to be eccentric. I love that quote from John Stuart Mill. But all of them have counselled against just going with the masses. You know, try and actually work it out for yourself. And many of the people who now trumpet freedom of speech, many of them sort of latched onto me and sort of tried to include me as part of their movements. And I've sort of somewhat resisted that because of the run-in that I had at Massey University with Don Brash. Remember, and I said that the Vice-Chancellor got it categorically wrong about not allowing him there. It was not because I agree with anything of Don Brash, but the fact is that you actually either create a martyr for someone like that, or you...
or a vacuum.
A vacuum. And actually the only way out through this, I firmly believe, is through kōrero, through discussion. But a lot of what the freedom of speech movements talk about, and they hearken back to the great philosophers, is, you know, they fall into the same trap of seeing things in black and white. And at the moment, we've had an explosion of knowledge, right? You where is the knowledge that's been lost in the information, as T.S. Eliot said, where's the wisdom that's been lost in knowledge?
Hang on, just go back, just repeat that.
T.S. Eliot, he's got a whole list. He says, where is the information we've lost? Where is the knowledge we've lost in information? Where is the wisdom we've lost in knowledge? And so we're so teeming with it at the touch of I'm picking up my cell phone at the moment, our smartphones. We're more connected with knowledge of the world than what we ever have, but we're still as prone to be as ignorant as what we ever have been.
Yep.
So I suppose what I'm saying in a roundabout way is that let's take climate change, for example, the climate science. Well, have you ever looked at, what is it, the ICCPR? No, it's not ICCPR, it's the ICCC, whatever the acronym is, report. It's thousands of pages long. It's almost impenetrable for an average person to be able to delve into that and get a nuanced understanding of exactly where things are. And what that has been done in the past is that we've been raised to have a belief and a faith in the institutions of government to be able to more or less put us on the right path. We've often shunned conspiracy theories. Everybody loves a good conspiracy theory. I love one as much as anybody else. But we shun it because we've been raised in an environment where we understand base principles of truth, honesty, integrity, of compassion, of empathy, of the ethics of how a system works, to such an extent that many of us through life and through education have developed a reasonably good smell test. Most conspiracy theories fall over because I've had enough to do with high-ranking people in government and intellectualism to know that only if only there was a bag big enough to put everybody in to stick to the same line, that would be great. But just as it's chaotic down here, it's chaotic up there. There isn't somebody who's ruling it all, just saying we're going to keep most people in the dark and we're going to do this. I mean, it sounds wonderful, and you get X amount of bits of evidence and you can piece together some fanciful story, but it just is not how humans work. They're just not that sophisticated.
I just jump in there. I always feel sorry for prime ministers or let's use prime ministers in New Zealand or leaders of the National Labour, when the press turn up and go, Sally's said such and such, or Bruce has said such and such, and they must think, oh fuck, God.
It's just like, it's like, I think if you can imagine being the Prime Minister and somebody coming up to you and telling you about a conspiracy and go, look, it sounds really nice, but I didn't get the memo, and yet I'm meant to be running this conspiracy. What I'm trying to say is that I'm not convinced that freedom of speech as it was articulated by our philosophical ancestors can be applied in such a rarefied environment now with the nuance of information in quite the same way. And what that means is that nobody can then say that they are the arbiters of truth. I mean, many people come and study law, for example, and they're like surprised that it's not black and white. I go, nothing's black and white. I mean, how much in life is black and white? There's just so many, we've got gravity here, and we know that is truth. There are some things that we can really nail down.
It's consistent.
And it's consistent, right?
Yeah.
It's absolutely, we can nail it down. But there are other things that we actually muddle our way through with a semblance of a adequate, if not good, understanding of things to the best of our ability and knowledge through learning from others. And I just sometimes think perhaps we should be less categorical about absolutely everything, unless it's some basic facts that we can sort of all agree on, and I know to the extent we can't. But on other things, we've got much to learn from each other. And whether you're a Jordan Peterson, who you might think is the devil incarnate and therefore won't listen to any of it, well, actually, why don't you have a listen and see what you actually have in common, and then try and build up an ability to be able to have a common vocabulary. I've written on this in the sense that we need to be able to get our position that at the very least we can disagree well.
That's exactly what I wanted to.
But if we can't get in the same room, and so I'm not convinced. My bastion is debates. So many of the people who go, oh yes, it's the challenges of ideas, and it's the crucible of the debate, and if you've got a good idea, then you should be able to just put it forward, and that's just like saying a meritocracy, that those who have got the most skills float to the top. It's like many of the people who are saying that that there's nothing wrong with the system now, Chris, for you to talk about partnership with Māori. I mean, that's racism. And it's just like, who on their right mind would think that their current systems are not actually systemically racist when you have a look at the statistics of how underrepresented Māori and Pacifica are on everything you don't want them represented on, how underrepresented they are on everything you do want them are. They lead the prisons, yet they're only 15 to 17% of the community.
Health.
They lead health is atrocious, you know. They lead the poverty stakes. They lead all the stakes that you don't want them to, and you can't just put it down some eugenics thing saying, well, that's somehow within them. It's
lazy.
the system.
They're lazy.
Yeah, exactly.
They're lazy,
exactly.
mate.
Exactly.
Lazy, don't
So,
work.
so my answer is to say, look, perhaps our system isn't working the best it should, and I say that with my tongue firmly in my cheek. Perhaps we've got something to learn from everybody, and that we can actually capitalise on the amazing things that we have done well for people by actually bringing in some different ways of thinking. And a good place to start would be Indigenous points of view, Māori in particular, because we're in partnership with Māori. Before, people come and say, oh, the te reo is a lot of real, what are you learning te reo for? And Bachelor of Criminal Justice at Canterbury, they always go, oh, we're learning all this Māori stuff. Maori stuff is often how they would say it, Māori stuff. And I go, because if you want to work in criminal justice, and they go, oh, I'm going to go overseas anyway, so why am I learning all that? And I go, because every criminal justice system in the world is struggling with the overrepresentation of minorities. Why? Because it's majority rule and it's it's structurally against people, and we've got to then figure out how we can actually address this if we're not going to have systemic problems, unless we're going to build big gated communities around our houses with razor wire and machine gun sentries at every corner. Then we have to find a way in which we can sort of moderate some of these things so it's not just white is right. And so, and I said, if you want to go to England, you want to go to the States, and they might not have Māori people there, but they will have their people who are minorities are grossly overrepresented. And why? Because they're not listened to, because they can't recognise the system, because there's been a breakdown in education, because there's socioeconomic, because of health, because of all sorts of different things. And so, actually, in a long-winded, yes, freedom of speech and freedom, probably more importantly, freedom of thought, but we have to actually, like the how you're going, we have to train people with the mechanisms by which they can start seeking out the information, and they can do it in a way that they can give themselves some really clear guidance. So that's why global citizenship is why I'm interested in the sustainable development goals, and global citizenship is all those things. It's almost like a global civics. It's not the borderless human being. It's not the passport person with all the stamps in it. You can be a global citizen and never have left your street. You can be actually, to be one, you have to have incredibly strong sense of tūranga waiwai.
Yep.
It's not against. It's not tribalism versus. It's actually critical thinking, creative thinking. Responsibility. What does it mean to be a responsible citizen? Yes, I'm all about rights. Did a PhD in rights. I know rights are very, very important. But what would a bill of obligation actually look like? There's a new book that's just come out that I'm interested in reading. Came out 2 months ago. And then welfare, and then action. So what does it actually mean to have the base? And part of that is how do we deal with information? How do we have the skills to be able to sift through what might be a Wikipedia listing as opposed to something that's in a journal article? How do we navigate through the sea of information that's all clambering with the wee flag of truth above it for us to be able to build up the experience and the knowledge and the principles behind us that we then use as a filter to say, does that pass the smell test? Because we're not going to be able to investigate everything. And sometimes we do have to put our faith in people we trust, because it's like, I don't have the time or the energy or the aptitude to be able to go and research that to find out whether this person or this person's talking shit. There's so much information out there that we've lost the ability to be able to get ahead. It's not like this is the Renaissance man or the early founders of the US Constitution who could read the stars, could recite a bit of poetry, could understand a bit of philosophy and run a slave house and a business, on the side, and could know what the weather was going to happen and when things were going to be planted and sprouted. Those days are sort of largely gone as far as the in-depth knowledge of various areas. So we have to, in a sense, I think, for a community, build a recognised collaborative sense of principles by which we think are the things that bind us together. There has to be things that bind the communities together. And what are those? And I think they're things like empathy, compassion, understanding, curiosity. They're all the things that we train our toddlers. How to share, how to learn from others, how to not be too arrogant, how to not be too prissy and too, delicate about people criticising you, how to communicate in nice ways. And it might not be through a debate. It might be through marae-style discussion. Māori have got some really good ideas about how having collective conversations that move forward instead of just going round and round and round on one side, arguing against another side and neither listening to each other.
But it takes time.
Takes time. Often do it over kai, and you do it over a long period of time. Once you've got to know people, and you get to know people by talking about their whakapapa, what makes them tick, who they are, the conversation. You and I are going to know each other for a very, very long time, Harv. And this here is a great way to start it because we just know a little bit more about each other's essence and where we're coming from, which means that when we can speak much more honestly towards each other.
Yep.
And avoid that instant bristling if you come and tell me I'm being a fuckwit sometime, which I will be, and you will have to tell me that. But it'll come from
You can't tell me that though, because I'm too sensitive.
It'll come from a position now where I'll go, well, Harv knows my story and he knows where I'm coming from, and I respect him because I know his story and I see where he's coming from. Yeah, perhaps I am. As opposed to some guys just come off the street and told me that. I'm going to bristle and go, no, you are, mate, and here's how you are because I'm going to intellectually pull apart your argument.
Going back to this conversation about information, and I had a fascinating conversation. I actually listened to it with the Edmund Hillary Fellowship, and they were talking about, there were people there that were very much into technology and so forth, and talking about information and how do we deal with all this information. And I was listening to this for an hour, and there's some very bright people, and I was just sitting there, and at the end I said, guys, I don't think we need more information. I think we need more connection. We need to learn how to connect more. Information's never made anybody happy.
No.
It's not and I said, I actually think we need less information and we need to learn how to connect more.
Yeah, this is not an information problem. This is not a problem that you just throw better arguments at. This is a problem of human connection. It's a problem of the base principles of what we say is my connection with my neighbour, the person sitting across the table from me, from the person who doesn't look like me and doesn't have the same religion, doesn't have the same skin colour. I'm not saying I've got all the answers, but often when I go and speak at Rotary clubs or what have you, and they talk about, they're interested in this and about the breakdown of the fabric of society, and a guy Robert Putman wrote a book in 2000, Bowling Alone, in the States, and he talked about social cohesion. What was it about social cohesion? How come some communities are more cohesive than others? And he picked on scouts and volunteerism, and he said, look, volunteerism is really, really important because it's about bonding and bridging. And he says bonding is within a group, and then bridging is bridging to another group. So he said they're very, very important to have the social cohesion that brings a community together. And he'd predicted that in the States that was all falling apart. And he said by 20 years it'll be really falling apart. Well, that was in 2000, and of course it sort of come to pass. And so often when I say to a group like the Lions, even here in Fielding, I'll go, okay, well, when was the last time you reached out to a Polynesian group of the women's knitters? I don't even know any Polynesian groups, but there are of them around. What about a Polynesian church group? Or people go, people don't have conversations now, and they just on their phone the whole time, and you can't get them to engage, and it's just the social media is the devil and what have you. And I go, okay, so when was the last time you went down your street and just knocked on people's door enough for them to come around and have a cup of tea? When was the last time? And it means for me the same for me.
Or just fucking smile at somebody.
Just smiling, just trying to make a human connection. I mean, let's Let's just do it within our group for a start before we can then actually stretch our legs and go beyond a group. I mean, there's whole communities of groups. Local Māori here, incredibly vivacious and engaged and intelligent, just here in the Manawatu. I mean, how many of our listeners or people in the Manawatu would have reached out to them and rather than because they have to, because there's some resource consent that the council says you've got to negotiate with iwi. What about just going like, hey, we've got some problems with kids down the road and we don't quite know, they're not necessarily Māori kids, and we don't know, we think about building a park, but what do you reckon is the things that we could do that best spend our time and energy on? We're thinking about having a sausage sizzle on the weekend and raising some money, Lions Crew. How about we work with you? What are you guys doing to try? Because we're actually trying to do the same thing, aren't we? Because you might find that the people who you think are the other are actually have much more in common with. So I'm with you. All of this, the disinformation, whatever, is not an information problem. It's a filter problem, and the filters are our brains, and we're not giving ourselves and training our people to be conscious human beings enough in the context of a wider society where relationships and whanaungatanga and manaakitanga and kaitiakitanga and a whole lot of words that I can't really replicate in English. I'm not commandeering those. I'm not appropriating them. I just think they're fucking good words to explain things that it's a different way of looking at it. But we're all human beings. The same problems that we have. Māori have got problems as well as everybody. It's not saying that there's some sort of uber race out there. It's just that we look at things, the same collective issues, Soren Kierkegaard, the same collective issues differently, and perhaps we just need to draw the connections there. Because nobody, as they always say, is rude and abusive of people that they know or have a relationship with to the same extent as they do on social media when you think it's some faceless stranger.
I'm just going to bring in something really fucking left field. While you have a spell, Chris has just sat back and had a bit of rest. I worked in shearing gangs for years, I was sure, and it was a lot of fun. And I was farming, but I'd shear on the weekends to make some cash. And I was terrible shearers, slow and fucking, I was terrible. But they would put up with me joining them for a weekend to make up a stand. And the number of times Māori used at the end of the day, would you be on the piss somewhere in a pub or whatever, and I'd listen to them and they would laugh at Pākehā parties and laugh at Pākehā dancing. And I'd go, that's not very nice. And then they'd mimic my dancing, like the stick figure. And I'd go, oh, fuck off. And I'd talk about the Pākehā parties, about how boring they were. Oh, it was so
Classic.
funny. That just came to my my memory.
Classic.
And it was so funny to be in this Māori world, as this honky in this Māori world.
Yeah.
And they tolerated me, and I got on with them famously. But it was so much fun.
I just think there's so much opportunity for, I would like, I say this with a bit of trepidation, particularly the way the communities have got these days, but, the town hall discussions, even the town hall dances, where just everybody came actually. They weren't for a particular group, they were for everybody. But even things like why I'm involved in the Kimbolton Sculpture Festival. We started that up about rural mental well-being, but also to just showcase that rural people are not people who've got three heads and are just basically spitting burnt out carbon.
And people do odd shit, which is wicked.
It is, and actually there shouldn't be a big urban-rural divide. We're actually all humans trying to get on with it. So we've got rural people who go, oh, well, you buy the produce and you're constantly demanding cheap stuff in your supermarkets, and where does that going to come from? And then the town people going, oh, well, you're just polluters and you're just knocking down all of, grass
and none of
animals
that's true.
and stuff. And it's just like everyone's talking past each other,
Yeah.
while the problem is just getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
And so that ability to be able to have better conversations, as something I published in the Herald, conversation matters. It does, because for me it's the essence of connection. It's not about being extrovert. It's not about being introvert. It's not about personality types. It's about human connection. It's about the human condition and understanding it, and then having empathy for it and the ability to be able to relate to people from walks of life that, I don't know who said it, before you criticise anybody, take a mile in their shoes.
And disagree.
Oh, disagree. We're not all going to agree. This is not some utopian and we're all going to come together and sing Kumbaya. At times we'll be, and sometimes even passionately, we'll disagree.
Yep. There was a wonderful scrap recorded at the, I can't pronounce it, it was at the big cultural Māori concert up in Auckland recently, and there was a wonderful scrap between Auckland and Hamilton. I'm just Tainui. I can't remember the Auckland. There's a wonderful scrap recorded between the two tribes, and having this massive fucking verbal scrap, and they put down the koha, and the other tribe wouldn't accept it. And it was just, and what was fascinating, listening to the Māori scholars describing this, it's the first time that there's been this open scrap in public between two tribes. Instead of Māori scrapping with Pākehā, these two Māori tribes scrapping with each other. And how wonderful it was to see that back out in the open. And that it was just, and it was done so respectfully, quite aggressively at times, and it was just, and it was fascinating because there was a guy died during this, sitting on the sidelines. And the koha went to his family.
Wow.
And they said how significant that was. And I thought, this is I don't know, coming of age, but it's a moment in our history that we need to really cherish and go, this is a wonderful thing. It was a wonderful
That's
thing.
amazing. I mean, I don't want to say that scrapes are necessarily good things. I don't subscribe to that.
It was healthy.
Whatever doesn't kill you
it was
makes you
out in the
stronger.
open.
But what it does remind me of is the fact that even in little old New Zealand, I mean, we've been through a lot. It's not like the first time we've faced some big sort of standoffs. The Great Strike of 1912, 1913, then the rise, then straight into World War One, and then the rise of fascism, then the Great Depression in 1930, then World War Two, then the Waterside Strike, 51, then Malaya, Korea, Vietnam, the oil crisis, early 70s.
81
Springbok tour, 84, 5 and 6, which of course the Longy government, Richard Preble, Roger Douglas, floating of the dollar, bankruptcy of the country started with, of course, bankruptcy of the country, think big, floating of the dollar, deregulation of absolutely everything, selling off the airways, the Māori Council case 87, challenging their privatisation, of course, anti-nuclear, homosexual law reform. We've been some big. We haven't even got
Dame Whena Cooper.
We haven't even got to the 90s. Dame Whena Cooper, past end point. We've got, early 1990. Then we got the Asian financial crunch in the early to mid 90s. We had the Employment Contracts Act 1991, which was really quite revolutionary and a big cultural sort of change. These things have just been. 2001 with the Twin Towers, there have been really big things that why I think it's incredibly important for my poetry gigs that I do in pubs and wine bars and what have you around, mix three things together: a bit of humour, a bit of oral storytelling, the history of New Zealand, and who I try and weave together at least part of the story of who we are as New Zealanders, woven together through the tradition of storytelling poetry. Because it's really, really important, I believe, for us to tell us about past troubles and past difficulties and our history, because they come out with morals.
Yeah.
And the morals are about, this is how we navigated our way through this. This is how we succeeded. This is how we came together after times of adversity. And this is because we've been through a lot. And one thing I do fear is that there seems to be a little bit of a tendency at the moment throw the baby out with the bathwater and think that everything that has ever happened within a colonial sort of structure is a bad thing, and therefore there is nothing salvageable, and there needs to be a complete revolution, and it's evolution, not revolution. I do think there are some things, however we might find ourselves, we all find ourselves here at the moment, we need to get on, but it's not just merely a case of just saying that we're all some sort of just melting pot one people. We can embrace the fact that we come from different heritage and historical and whakapapa, and that brings a real rich flavour. Again, you need to have a really good understanding of your tūranga waiwa, your home base, who you are and where you are in the world, in order for those relationships to be able to build with others.
Yep. And Chris, going back for, young people growing up trying to work out who the fuck they are, it's not easy. It's not easy, and it's not always clear, and it takes work. It takes consciousness to not be like our big brothers or big sisters.
It takes guidance as well, which I feel, this is why, and what I've looked into with collective intelligence, I'm so enthused about what you're doing, Harv, is that I've said for a long time that I feel as if there's some sort of, from my generation, an abrogation of the responsibility to awhi the next generation through some of the challenges and pitfalls, and not merely say, what are you? Or not merely say, pull yourself together, mate. And not merely have all those old tropes that we were told, but actually just say, you know what, there are some really tough times that come, and we're struggling and still getting a head around it. But what I've found is that it's really healthy if I turn social media off for a few months at a time. Perhaps you might want to try it, to the 13-year-old, 14, 15-year-old who's feeling a bit overwhelmed because the debate and the argument that they had at school now involves 30 people on social media on Snapchat on a Saturday night, and it's 11 o'clock and they can't get to sleep because they're worried about it because their phone keeps on pinging. And also, from the university side of things, I saw kids with, it now ends up being, that you don't only have to be successful in your chosen area academically, but now you have to have the volunteer badge, the welfare badge, the everything else badge. And these kids are now putting CVs together that when I look at them, I think, man, you used to have to be 40 years old to get this. So what I'm worried about is that we're raising a generation that by the time they get to 30, they will be rinsed and they'll be empty vessels of and collapse, because there's so much busy work around all of this. We're not a great deal of in-depth, transformative life, like really embedding life skills. But I think that comes with evolution, and there's things like collective intelligence that are coming to the fore where they're not merely just a boom, 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 bounce along the top, or a tick boxing. They're actually trying to, and they're not merely just saying, they're not just like hammering the issue of like, how are you, until you get an answer. You're actually saying, now let's try and dissect that question, and here's some ways in which, in some community groups and ecosystems you can be a part of, that you can even start to begin to self-analyze that question, how are you? Because I know for me, I feel I always pause and stutter, and I try and read the room, thing, are they asking me that, or are they asking me that? And do I say good? Yeah. But I always feel instantly, I feel quite overwhelmed by it. Yeah. Because I'm like, where do I start?
Yeah. 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 And we've found with collective intelligence, the check-in is so important. And some of our facilitators will get the team to meditate beforehand. And some people really struggle with that. And it needs to be for 5 minutes. And just the impact that has on the team of just centering the team, just settling everybody down and just being present and going, here we are, we're all together just sitting around in this time and place right now. And making sure that the phones are off the table and just little things like that, and just going, here we are, we're in each other's presence, just as you and I are now. And I've really enjoyed this, being in your presence, listening to your story.
Yeah, me too with you.
And going, what a fucking gift that is, just being in the moment right now. And that's why I love these headphones. I put the headphones on for this podcast, and we don't need the headphones. We can do it without the headphones, but I do the headphones because it centers us more. And going, we need to listen to each other.
To leave you with something, Noel Ginn, who is passed now, but was a confidant of James K. Baxter. And I was talking to, because I'm, among other things, chief executive of the Sisters of Compassion group, and there's a few sisters left, and they're worldly wise women. And of course, started up at Hiraharama, up the Wanganui River in Jerusalem. And a quote from Noel Ginn was, "A still point in an unquiet world." And the sisters talk a lot about pause and quiet. And even, all of this, Soren Kierkegaard talks about, once I've finished saying everything I need to, it is the time for silence and space. And not many of us are comfortable with silence and space in this world. I mean, how much silence and space do we have in our lives? Not much. We have to channel it out. And whether that's under the label of sort of, of consciousness, or what is it when we I can't remember the word now, where we think I'm sitting here and I'm holding a pencil in my hand and I'm having a cup of coffee, or I'm looking at a glass and I'm holding the cup, and we put everything else out of our mind just to slow the brain down. But it's in those types of environments that I think real connection can happen.
Yep. I've told this story before. We had the facilitators together. There were about 7 in the room, and facilitating facilitators is fascinating. It is it's the best facilitation I can do, because they're so considered and thoughtful and don't talk over each other, and they're just, and it was a team day, and we had this new woman working with us, Bettina Anderson, who's a magnificent woman. First time she'd met the whole team, and she had recently joined us. We're in Wellington, we're in the room, and we're talking and communicating, and somebody put forward a question, and everybody just sit there and nod and consider, and nobody was speaking for about 90 seconds. And in Bettina's head, she's going, "Was that for me? Am I supposed to be talking? What was the question?" All this stuff was just exploding in her head, because she'd never been in a meeting with so much silence. And that's what you get when you facilitate facilitators. The silence, where people are thinking, reflecting, and very comfortable in the silence. And when our collective intelligence teams are going really well, because they'll be quite happy with the silence and just sit there. And it's an interesting thing to think that people, when they're really communicating well, there's silence. And it's something that I'm fascinated with and learning with. And it's something that I think if we could teach people that really good communication means that there's silence. Because how often are you with a group of people in a meeting and they're all just fucking talking over each other?
Oh, yeah, all the time.
Because they want to get their view in. And you can see them building up to talk. When Bruce over here hasn't even finished and somebody here's just going, and I'm in. And the number of times I'm cheering, go, do you have any idea what this guy just said here?
Yeah.
And so I think
just
that's
a series of rhetorical statements.
Yeah. So I think, anyway.
Can I leave you with a poem?
Before we do that, so we've got a list of things to get through today, Chris.
Oh, yeah, okay. Have we started the list?
We haven't even started. We tick off. Creativity. We've mentioned that.
Yeah.
A little bit. The structures of 2023.
A little bit.
A little bit. And freedom of thought. A little bit there. Yeah. So let's finish with a poem. Chris, this has been awesome. And we're knocking off now because you've got to go somewhere in a wee while. And some people have died since we've started this podcast. That's unfortunate.
Look, I was thinking a couple of poems, both by James K. Baxter, but I think I'll do Haere Rā. I've got a couple of peach stones.
You have?
That I carry around with me, actually. I don't always have them in every pair of pants that I am wearing on every day, but they're very important to me. And they're taken from the place of this poem. and it's called Haere and it goes, farewell Hiraharama, the green hills and the river fog, cloaking the convent and the Maori houses. The peach tree at my front door is broken, sister. It carries too much fruit, and it hangs now by a thin strip of bark, but better that than the grey moss that cloaks the branch like an old man's beard. We are smothered by the love of the many. But then we are at peace, like the river, like the fog, like the roofless house that lets the sun stream in because it cannot help it.
Chris, thank you. This has been wonderful. And I look forward to working with you in the future and having more of these conversations. And I have a funny feeling we might do another podcast one day.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening in. We're Collective Intelligence, a one-of-a-kind people ecosystem that takes inspiration from Mother Nature. To find out how we reimagine leadership development, visit our website www.collectiveintelligence.co.nz.